Hello, kids, and welcome to the Children's Fireside Storytime from our library in Grosse Pointe Woods. Tonight we're going to read Curious George by H.A. Rey. Hope you enjoy it. Curious George by H.A. Rey. This is George. He lived in Africa. He was a good little monkey. He was always very curious. One day, George saw a man. He had on a large yellow straw hat. The man saw George, too. What a nice little monkey, he thought. I'd like to take him to my home with me. He put his hat on the ground, and of course, George was curious. He came down from the tree, and he looked at the large yellow hat. The hat had been on the man's head. George thought it would be nice if he had it on his own head. He picked it up and put it on. The hat covered George's head. He could not see. The man picked him up quickly and popped him into a bag. George was caught. The man with the big yellow hat put George into a little boat, and a sailor rowed them both across the water to a big ship. George was sad, but he was still a little curious. On the big ship, things began to happen. The man took off the bag. George sat on a stool, and the man said, "George, I'm going to take you to a big zoo in a big city. You will like it there. Now run along and play, but don't get into any trouble." George promised to be good, but it's easy for little monkeys to forget. On the deck, he found some seagulls. He wondered how they could fly. He was very curious. Finally, he had to try. It looked easy, but oh, what happened? First this, and then this. "Where's George?" The sailors looked and looked. At last they saw him struggling in the water and almost all tired out. "Man overboard!" the sailors cried as they threw him a life belt. George caught it and held on. At last he was safe on board. After that, George was more careful to be a good monkey, till at last the long trip was over. George said goodbye to the kind sailors, and he and the man with the yellow hat walked off the ship and onto the shore and on into the city to the man's house. After a good meal and a good pipe, George felt very tired. He crawled into bed and fell asleep at once. The next morning, the man telephoned the zoo. George watched him. He was fascinated. The man went away. George was curious. He wanted to telephone too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What fun! Ding-a-ling, ding-a-ling. George had telephoned the fire station. The firemen rushed to the telephone. "Hello, hello," they said, but there was no answer. They looked for the signal on the big map that showed where the telephone call had come from. They did not know it was George. They thought it was a real fire. "Hurry, hurry, hurry!" The firemen jumped onto the fire engines and onto the hook and ladders. Ding dong, ding dong. "Everyone out of the way! Hurry, hurry, hurry!" The firemen rushed into the house. They opened the door. No fire, only a naughty little monkey. "Ah, catch him, they cried. George tried to run away. He almost did, but he got caught in the telephone wires. And a thin fireman caught one arm, and another fireman caught the other. "You fooled the fire department," they said. "We'll have to shut you up where you can't do that any more harm. They took him away and shut him into a prison. George wanted to get out. He climbed up to the window and tried the bars. Just then the watchman came in. He got on the warden bed to catch George, but he was too big and heavy. The bed tipped up, the watchman fell over, and quick as lightning, George ran out through the open door. He hurried through the building and out onto the roof. Then he was lucky to be a monkey. Out he walked onto the telephone wires. Quickly and quietly over the guard's head, George walked away. He was free. Down in the streets, outside the prison walls, stood a balloon man. The little girl bought a balloon for her brother. George watched. He was very curious again. He felt he must have a bright red balloon. He reached over and tried to help himself. But instead of one balloon, the whole bunch broke loose. And in an instant, the wind whisked them all away, and with them went George, holding on tight with both hands. Up he sailed, higher and higher. The house looked like little toys, and the people looked like dolls. George was frightened. He held on very tight. At first, the wind blew in great gusts. Then it quieted. Finally, it stopped blowing altogether. George was very tired. Down, down he went, bump onto the top of a traffic light. Everyone was surprised. The traffic light got all mixed up, and George didn't know what to do. Then he heard someone call, "George!" He looked down and saw his friend, the man with the big yellow hat. George was very happy. The man was very happy too. George slid down the post, and the man with the big yellow hat put him under his arm. Then he paid the balloon man for all the balloons. Then he and George and the man climbed into the car, and at last, away they went. To the zoo. What a nice place for George to live. The end. Thank you for joining us tonight for the reading of Curious George from the Children's Fireside Storytime in Grosse Pointe Park. Good night.